Have you ever wondered if there's more to the story of creation than we were ever told? What if the Bible hid secrets about different types of humans from Genesis? Today, we are going to explore a mystery that many overlook and uncover the hidden secret that could change the way you see creation and the history of humanity. Have you ever stopped to think about what Genesis really tells us about the first humans and their creation? The Bible doesn't just present a simple narrative. Every word has cultural, spiritual, and historical background that can reveal much more than it appears at first glance. To understand the possibility that there are two types of humans in Genesis, we must first explore the context in which it was written. The book of Genesis was written at a time when ancient peoples had their own vision of the world, of the gods, and of the origin of humanity. The biblical authors not only wanted to tell the story of how God created the universe, but also to establish a spiritual and moral identity for the people of Israel. The stories of Adam and Eve and of creation in general are full of symbolism and teachings that go beyond the literal narrative. That is why it is important to read Genesis with a perspective that considers both the historical and the spiritual. Genesis 1 and 2 show us two creation accounts that, although complementary, present significant differences. In Genesis 1, the creation of man and woman is described in general terms as part of the culmination of all creation. Here, humanity appears as a collective, reflecting the image of God. In Genesis 2, the account focuses on Adam, formed from the dust of the ground, and the creation of Eve from his rib, introducing more intimate and personal details. These differences have led scholars to ask whether these accounts might be pointing to different aspects or even different types of humanity. One as a spiritual image and the other more earthly and specific. It is also important to consider the original Hebrew words. Some terms may carry nuances that are not fully captured in modern translations, leaving room for deeper interpretations. Understanding the cultural and linguistic context allows us to see that Genesis does not merely recount events. It also conveys spiritual principles, hierarchies, and roles that could be related to the existence of two types of humans, according to some interpretations. With this context in mind, we are ready to explore the theories about the two types of humans and discover what hidden secrets Genesis might be revealing. This will allow us to see how the spiritual and the earthly intertwine in the biblical narrative, and what lessons we can apply to our life and faith today. Have you ever wondered if the Bible really speaks of more than one type of human from the very beginning? Many read Genesis thinking there is only a simple creation account, but a careful analysis of chapters 1 and 2 reveals differences and nuances that have led theologians and scholars to propose fascinating theories about the existence of two types of humans, one more spiritual and the other more earthly. Understanding these theories not only sparks curiosity, but also helps us delve into the richness of the biblical message and its relevance for our spiritual life today. The first significant theory holds that Adam in Genesis 1 and Adam in Genesis 2 represent two distinct aspects of humanity. In Genesis 1, humanity is created as a collective, man and woman, reflecting the image of God. This Adam is collective and spiritual, symbolizing human dignity, mission, and connection with the divine. On the other hand, Genesis 2 focuses on an individual Adam, formed from the dust of the ground, with intimate details about his life and surroundings. This account highlights vulnerability, concrete humanity, and the need for relationship with others. Some scholars suggest that this could indicate the existence of a more spiritual type of human, whose identity is linked to God, and a more earthly one, with specific roles, needs, and challenges. Another interesting theory is based on the original Hebrew language. Words like Adam and Ish have different connotations that could indicate different levels or types of humanity. Adam can refer to humanity in general, while Ish is translated as an individual man. These linguistic nuances have led some experts to interpret that the Bible might be showing the coexistence of a spiritual human intended to reflect the image of God and an earthly human, limited and dependent on the physical environment, as seen in the story of Adam and Eve in the garden. Some theologians also consider that the difference between the two accounts points to different purposes. Genesis 1 establishes a universal and spiritual framework, while Genesis 2 shows the practical and moral dimension of human life. This distinction suggests that creation is not a uniform act, but has layers. One type of human exists to fulfill a broader divine purpose, and another lives in interaction with the physical and social world. From this perspective, both types of humans are complementary and necessary to understand humanity's story according to the Bible. There are also theories connecting these differences to lineages or special roles within humanity. Some scholars suggest that certain later passages could indicate that Adam, as a spiritual prototype, represents a lineage seeking closeness to God, while the earthly Adam reflects common humanity with its struggles, flaws, and learning. This does not necessarily contradict the unity of humanity, but helps us understand different dimensions of the human being: the spiritual, capable of connecting directly with God, and the earthly, which experiences physical and social life. Another fascinating interpretation arises when comparing the Genesis account with nearby ancient texts, such as those from Mesopotamia and Sumer. In these cultures, beings were created with specific purposes, some to serve the gods, others as guardians or intermediaries. Considering that the Bible may have been written in a similar cultural context, some scholars suggest that Genesis distinguishes between a human with a direct spiritual purpose and one more connected to the earth and daily work, which could explain the narrative differences between the two chapters. Beyond academic theory, these interpretations have deep spiritual implications. If we accept the idea that there are two dimensions of the human being from Genesis, we can reflect on our own lives. Are we cultivating our spiritual dimension, the one that reflects the image of God, or are we trapped only in the earthly, practical, and visible? Recognizing these two facets allows us to seek balance, developing both our relationship with God and our ability to interact with the world and others wisely and justly. In summary, theories about the two types of humans in Genesis focus on differences between the Adam accounts in chapters 1 and 2, the meaning of the original language, the distinction between spiritual and earthly purpose, possible lineages and roles, and comparisons with ancient texts. Each of these perspectives invites us to look beyond the literal story and consider the spiritual and symbolic richness that the Bible offers. It teaches us that human creation has multiple dimensions: the spiritual, which connects us with God, and the earthly, which challenges us to live purposefully and responsibly in the world. Have you ever wondered if Genesis hides a secret that few have discovered about the creation of humanity? Beyond the narrative we all know, some scholars suggest that the biblical account does not just talk about the creation of Adam and Eve, but also reveals a profound mystery about the types of humans and their purpose in God's plan. This secret is not just theoretical. It has spiritual implications that can transform the way we understand our relationship with God and the world. The first clue to the hidden secret is found in the differences between Genesis 1 and 2. In Genesis 1, humanity is created collectively, man and woman at the same time, reflecting the image of God and given a mandate of dominion and responsibility over the earth. Here, humans appear as spiritual, universal beings destined to fulfill a divine purpose. In Genesis 2, in contrast, the narrative focuses on an individual, Adam, formed from the dust of the ground, with Eve created from his rib. This account emphasizes the earthly, personal, and intimate dimension of humanity. The combination of these two approaches suggests that from the beginning, God created humanity with two complementary dimensions, one spiritual and one earthly. The second element of the secret is found in the original Hebrew language. Words like Adam and Ish are not exact synonyms. Adam refers to humanity in general, to the divine image that each human carries, while Ish indicates an individual, concrete, and limited man. This could reveal that Genesis shows that God created one type of human with universal spiritual potential and another more connected to the earth and physical experience. Understanding these linguistic nuances allows us to see that the Bible does not merely recount facts, but communicates deep layers of meaning about who we are and our purpose in creation. A third clue to the hidden secret is found in the dual purpose of human creation. The spiritual human, represented in Genesis 1, exists to reflect the image of God, to steward creation, and to develop justice, wisdom, and divine connection. The earthly human, represented in Genesis 2, experiences vulnerability, need, relationships, and learning. This duality teaches us that our existence combines the divine and the human. We need to cultivate our spirituality while learning to live and relate wisely and responsibly in the physical world. Before continuing, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss more content like this. That way, you'll always be up to date with our upcoming videos. Now, let's continue. The secret is also reflected in the interaction between Adam and Eve. Eve is not only created to accompany Adam, but represents complementarity, the union of spiritual and earthly aspects. This suggests that God designed humanity to exist in balance. The spiritual needs the earthly, and the earthly needs the spiritual to reach fulfillment. Recognizing this relationship helps us understand how our spiritual and practical lives should integrate, and how our decisions, relationships, and actions reflect that balance. Another key point is that the Genesis narrative is not just historical, but symbolic and spiritual. Every detail, from the dust of the ground to the creation of Eve from Adam's rib, has deep meaning. The dust symbolizes our fragility and connection to the earth, while the rib suggests closeness, support, and complementarity. These elements reinforce the idea that God designed humanity with multiple dimensions, visible and invisible, physical and spiritual, each with a purpose in His plan. The hidden secret is also linked to humanity's mission and destiny. Spiritual humanity is called to reflect the image of God in wisdom, justice, and creativity. Earthly humanity faces challenges, makes decisions, and learns from the physical world, preparing to fulfill its divine purpose. The combination of both types of humans explains why the Bible emphasizes the relationship between obedience, spiritual growth, and practical experience in daily life. Finally, this secret teaches us that every person possesses both dimensions. It is not about two separate groups of humans, but two aspects of our own existence, spiritual and earthly. Genesis invites us to cultivate our inner life, connect with God, and develop our spirituality while living responsibly, learning from experience, and building healthy relationships in our environment. In summary, the hidden secret in Genesis reveals that God created humanity with an intentional duality, a spiritual type to reflect His image, and an earthly type to live, learn, and experience physical reality. This understanding helps us balance our faith, actions, and relationships, showing that creation is not just history, but a profound and transformative plan, still relevant to our spiritual and practical life today. Have you ever wondered how your life would change if you truly understood the hidden secret of Genesis about the two types of humans? Understanding that from the beginning, God created a duality in humanity, a spiritual dimension and an earthly one, is not just an interesting fact. It has profound implications for our faith, our decisions, and the way we live each day. Applying this knowledge can transform how we relate to God, ourselves, and others. The first spiritual implication is recognizing our spiritual dimension. The spiritual human, represented in Genesis 1, is designed to reflect the image of God. This means that every person has divine potential that goes beyond the visible and tangible. Cultivating this dimension involves dedicating time to prayer, meditating on the Word, seeking discernment, and strengthening the connection with God. It is not a superficial religious exercise, but developing a deep understanding of who we are and our spiritual purpose. When we nurture this part of our life, our perspective, decisions, and priorities align with God's values and will. The second implication is valuing our earthly dimension. Genesis 2 shows humans living on earth, facing challenges, needs, and relationships. This reminds us that practical life, our daily actions, and interaction with the physical world are also part of God's plan. Being a conscious earthly human means taking responsibility for our decisions, learning from mistakes, caring for our body and environment, and building healthy and just relationships. Ignoring this dimension can lead to living disconnected from reality, while integrating it allows us to manifest our faith tangibly. Another crucial point is seeking balance between the spiritual and the earthly. Humanity's duality teaches that neither dimension can function fully without the other. Excessive focus on the spiritual without attention to the practical can lead to fanaticism or disconnection from reality. Conversely, focusing only on the earthly without cultivating spirituality leaves us empty, disoriented, and purposeless. The secret of Genesis invites us to integrate both dimensions, to live with purpose, faith, and wisdom, reflecting God's image while actively participating in our life and environment. Duality also has implications for our personal and community relationships. Spiritual and earthly humans were created to complement and collaborate. This teaches that our relationships should be based on respect, support, and mutual growth. Understanding that each person has both a spiritual and earthly dimension allows us to be more empathetic, patient, and constructive, helping others develop their faith while facing daily challenges. Another practical implication is decision-making and prioritization. Understanding the secret of Genesis helps us discern between what is urgent and what is important, between the superficial and the essential. It allows us to prioritize our relationship with God, cultivate spirituality, and at the same time fulfill our responsibilities in daily life. This understanding provides clarity and protects us from wasting time and energy on what does not contribute to our holistic growth. The hidden secret also influences our personal purpose and mission. The spiritual human has a divine calling to reflect the image of God, act with justice, wisdom, and love. The earthly human faces challenges that teach resilience, empathy, and practical learning. Recognizing both aspects helps us discover our unique role in the world and live intentionally, knowing our actions have both spiritual and tangible impact. Finally, this teaching invites a life of continuous transformation, understanding that our existence combines the spiritual and the earthly, commits us to grow constantly, balance our actions and faith, and allow God to guide us in every area of our life. This integration enables us to live fully, purposefully, and harmoniously, reflecting His image in all our decisions, relationships, and achievements. In summary, the hidden secret of Genesis about the two types of humans calls us to recognize and develop our spiritual dimension, value our earthly dimension, balance them, improve our relationships, prioritize correctly, live purposefully, and commit to continuous growth. Applying these teachings transforms our lives, draws us closer to God, and allows us to experience fulfillment, guidance, and purpose, showing that the mystery of Genesis is not just history, but a living guide for our daily lives. Have you ever heard interpretations of Genesis that left you more confused than inspired? Throughout the centuries, many readers have misunderstood the creation accounts and the first humans, generating misconceptions about who we are and our purpose. Recognizing common mistakes and misunderstandings is essential to properly apply the teachings about the two types of humans and the hidden secret Genesis reveals. Today we will examine the most frequent ones and how to avoid them so that your understanding of the Bible is clear and transformative. The first common mistake is taking the Genesis accounts entirely literally without considering the cultural and spiritual context. Although the Bible recounts historical events, it also uses symbols, metaphors, and profound teachings to convey spiritual truths. Reading Genesis only as a historical document can lead to confusion about the two types of humans, reducing the richness of the message to mere physical details rather than spiritual and practical principles. Understanding that the text has layers of meaning allows us to see creation as a divine design, integrating the spiritual and the earthly. Another frequent mistake is thinking that the two types of humans are separate or irreconcilable groups. Some interpret Genesis 1 and 2 as two completely distinct lineages, generating theories about physical, spiritual, or even racial differences. However, the Bible does not suggest separation, but rather complementary duality within each human being. We all share the spiritual dimension reflecting God's image and the earthly dimension facing daily challenges. Misunderstanding this idea can create division and theological misinterpretations. A third misunderstanding is focusing only on the spiritual dimension and neglecting the earthly. Many Christians think spirituality involves withdrawing from practical life, or that the earthly is less important. However, Genesis shows that both aspects are essential. Ignoring the earthly dimension can generate imbalance, frustration, and disconnection from reality, while cultivating only the physical without addressing spirituality leaves us empty and purposeless. The key is to integrate both dimensions to live fully. Another critical mistake is underestimating the significance of symbolic details. Some readers consider irrelevant that Adam was formed from dust, or that Eve came from his rib. These details are key to understanding the relationship between the earthly and the spiritual, human complementarity, and God's intention in creation. Overlooking these symbols deprives us of the deep understanding Genesis offers about our identity and purpose. It is also common to confuse the mystery of the two types of humans with esoteric or conspiratorial theories. Some look for explanations outside the biblical context, interpreting the accounts as references to aliens, superior humans, or secret lineages. These interpretations may be appealing or sensational, but distract from the central message, the spiritual and earthly duality that God integrated into every person to teach purpose, responsibility, and growth. Finally, a frequent mistake is not applying Genesis's teachings to daily life. Many remain in theory or intellectual curiosity without bringing these lessons to their faith, decisions, and relationships. Understanding that we have a spiritual and an earthly dimension should motivate us to balance prayer and action, reflection and practice, inner growth and responsibility in the world. Failing to do so limits our transformation and diminishes the practical impact of God's message. In summary, the most common mistakes in interpreting Genesis include reading the text literally, thinking the two types of humans are separate groups, focusing only on the spiritual or the earthly, ignoring symbols, falling into esoteric theories, and not applying the teachings in daily life. Recognizing these misunderstandings allows us to approach the hidden secret of Genesis with clarity, appreciate the duality designed by God, and live with balance, purpose, and transformation. Have you ever wondered what the teaching about the two types of humans in Genesis looks like in real life? Reading the account is one thing. Seeing how these truths impact people who choose to apply them in their daily lives is completely different. Testimonials and practical examples show that the spiritual and earthly duality is not just theory, but a guide for living with purpose, balance, and growth. Maria, for example, always felt trapped in routine and disconnected from her faith. Her life seemed focused only on the earthly, work, responsibilities, and worries. By studying Genesis and understanding that every person possesses a spiritual dimension alongside the earthly, she began dedicating daily time to prayer, meditation, and Bible reading. Gradually, she started experiencing clarity, inner peace, and a deeper connection with God. At the same time, she learned to balance her daily responsibilities, making more conscious decisions and living intentionally. Maria's story demonstrates that integrating both dimensions of humanity can completely transform our perspective and our lives. Another example is John, who faced constant conflicts in his relationships and important decisions. Reflecting on the duality of the spiritual and the earthly, He realized that his impulsive reactions and focus on material matters were preventing him from living fully. He began applying the spiritual dimension, praying before making decisions, reflecting on his actions, and seeking divine guidance. Over time, his relationships improved, his life became more harmonious, and he found a clear purpose in serving others. John teaches us that applying these principles not only changes our inner life, but also how we interact with the world. There are also collective examples. A Christian community that felt spiritually stagnant decided to study the creation of the two types of humans and put its teachings into practice. Service activities, joint prayer, and reflection on each member's spiritual and earthly dimension. Over time, the community experienced renewal, greater commitment, and a shared sense of purpose. This shows that understanding and applying the secret of Genesis can transform not only individuals, but entire groups, strengthening relationships and fostering collective growth. These testimonies show us that the key is not just knowing the theory, but actively applying the teaching, recognizing our spiritual dimension, valuing the earthly, and seeking balance allows us to live with direction, purpose, and real transformation. Each person can experience renewal and strengthened faith, as long as they commit to integrating these principles into their daily life. In summary, practical examples of people and communities applying the spiritual and earthly duality from Genesis show that this teaching has a real and tangible impact. It inspires us to reflect on our lives, balance the spiritual and the earthly, and live with purpose, demonstrating that the hidden secret of Genesis is not just an ancient mystery, but a living guide for our daily existence. In conclusion, Genesis reveals a profound secret. Each human combines a spiritual and an earthly dimension, and understanding this transforms our faith, decisions, and relationships. Applying these teachings allows us to live with purpose, balance, and fulfillment. If this video helped you discover how to integrate these dimensions into your life, give it a like, subscribe for more content that strengthens your faith, and share in the comments how you will apply this knowledge in your daily life. We want to hear your story and continue growing together in understanding the Word of God.